So my name is Paul Bindel. I'm with the Center for Community Wealth Building. I'm the co-op development director there, and I care about co-ops and started getting into cooperatives originally through housing cooperatives. That was about 20 years ago. Seems like a long time, but I lived in a student housing cooperative, and I was like really excited by the amount of money that I could save just by living in a house that had been cooperatively owned and managed. We were able to pay at that time. I guess it was like 18 years ago. I shouldn't have said 20, but it was $390, which included rent, utilities, and food. And it was just so amazing to live in a structure like that. It sort of turned a light bulb on for me of like the power of this economic model. And so I became really passionate about trying to create it in other parts of my life. And so at the Center for Community Wealth Building, we serve a lot of different businesses that are seeking to form cooperatives. And we primarily work with worker cooperatives, but this is another area of practice where we're trying to support businesses, multiple businesses that are trying to leverage scale and collaboration in order to create shared service cooperatives. So I wanted to clarify what cooperatives are and what they are not. So cooperatives are practical operating systems that center democracy. Unlike an LLC, where if you are a 60% owner, you get 60% of a vote. In a cooperative, every member gets the same vote. And so if you're looking to create a structure where people's voices are equal, for instance, a group of housing cooperatives, every member having one vote, no matter how much money they're putting into the shared service, cooperatives are a great way for that. They're also behind the scenes business infrastructure. So a lot of times we don't know that cooperatives exist. They're all around us, but they're like almost, I put the image of the pipe. There's things that we don't notice because they're working well. And cooperatives should benefit their members. They don't have an obligation to be evangelical about being a co-op. They just need to serve their members. And so that's a really key feature. The other thing is they are engine building long-term systems. So whenever you're trying to create a cooperative, you're not trying to solve like a quarterly problem, right? You're trying to create something that can build value and add value over time. And so it's an infrastructure kind of investment. They are not nonprofits or charities. So cooperatives may operate at low cost, but they are not nonprofits. They are also not a certification or designation. So, there is like a B Corp certification that you can apply for, or there's a designation of a public benefit corporation. But this is not a designation. This is actually a business entity. And finally, cooperatives are not always small. Some of the largest cooperatives in the US are shared service cooperatives. So just to give you a bird's eye view, we're not going to talk about these as case studies, but Burger King, KFC, and Taco Bell are all part of a shared service cooperative that distributes their food. One of the largest shared service cooperatives is a carpet cooperative called Carpet One, and every carpet store pretty much in the US uses Carpet One to get its carpets. Similarly, bike stores use the bike cooperative. A lot of independent bike stores use the bike cooperative. So they're all around us, but they're not always things that we might know of firsthand unless we're inside the business. Just a little glimpse. Here's a list of different Colorado cooperatives. So like I said, Carpet One is a big one. True Value stores are all cooperatively owned. Then there are other ones. The bike cooperative is active here. You might all know that credit unions are also cooperatives, but these are a lot of different kinds of cooperatives. Some of them are shared services in this side, and some of them are more worker owned. So what is something that makes all cooperatives different than traditional business? Someone asked me last night, like, how does this compare to a typical corporation? The biggest thing that I would say, in addition to the one member, one vote, is these 7 principles. So these are the 7 cooperative principles, and they are international principles. So cooperatives all over the world look at these principles and they use them and apply them in their own business. So the first is voluntary and open membership. This means that nobody is forced to be in a co-op. It's open, and there's a process that people can use in order to apply to become members. The second is democratic member control. So this is what I just mentioned earlier. It's one member, one vote. The members themselves get to decide about the cooperative. They could elect to have a more hierarchical structure. Perhaps the members, elect a representative, and there's a board that represents the members' interest. Everyone has short schedules. and not, you can't obviously manage everything. But cooperatives can, basically, they have a strong feature of democratic member control. The third is members' economic participation. This means that this is not just a club. There's actually dollars that are exchanged always in a cooperative. So it's not a social event. It's not a hobby. It's something economic. The fourth is autonomy and independence. That may sound kind of weird because it's like, aren't all businesses autonomous and independent? But in this case, many cooperatives are started by, trade associations, or they might be started by political parties in some countries, not in the US as much. Or they might be started by maybe even a religious organization or a nonprofit. The key thing here is that cooperatives have a primary obligation to their members. And so even if someone else gets them started, or even if there's inputs from outside sources, typically one of the values of cooperatives is that they are loyal to their members first, and they're not loyal to a political party or religious organization or things like that. The fifth value or principle is education, training, and information. And so every cooperative, because it's a member-led organization, requires that it's going to have an educational component. That could be onboarding new members, that could be helping members take on responsibilities in the board and learn new duties. But there's always going to be education. Cooperation among cooperatives is a competitive advantage. So every cooperative has a mandate to actively consider and evaluate how they can collaborate with other cooperatives. And so if you're starting a housing cooperative in, as we just mentioned, or if you're building a cooperative network in the Midwest, there might be a way that your cooperatives in the Midwest and the cooperatives in Colorado could collaborate. And we'll talk more about that later. And finally, there's concern for community. So, Milton Friedman famously said, the purpose of your corporation is profit. That's it. And so in cooperatives, there is another element besides profit and member benefit, which is concern for the community. Beyond our members, we have this, closer circle. We also care about the wider circle of our community. Does anyone have any questions about the co-op principles or thoughts? Like, which of these seem the most exciting to you, or which of them resonates most with you?
I think the economic participation, the reminder that there is something, it's not just a club kind of a thing. There has to be that economic side.
Well, thanks, Catherine. And I'm also seeing in chat, Rowan says democratic member control. Thank you, Rowan. Yeah. So some of the other values that a lot of cooperatives live into is self-help. So there are organizations, unlike nonprofits, where you generally have to be a public good. It's an organization designed around helping a specific group of people. And then another is shared responsibility, democracy, equality, equity, and solidarity. So there's a lot of different points of collaboration, right, that cooperatives bring out and they touch on as we are developing them, because they really are human-based organizations, and they're building on the power of collaboration. So just a kind of basic overview, this is an example of a cooperative that has management, and employees. So you could potentially have a cooperative, see this red quadrant and the orange quadrant. You could have a smaller cooperative that just has members and a board of directors, and the members elect the board of directors. You could also have a larger cooperative that has members who elect the board of directors, who hire a manager, and the manager serves the members. Or you could have, this is the most sophisticated and maybe the most complex, like members, board of directors, manager, and the manager hires employees who all serve the members. But I share this slide just to kind of show that the governance structure of a cooperative is really different from a nonprofit. We're not bringing in outside people to come and serve on our board. Instead, it's like the board is made up of the members, and the board itself is in charge of, hiring any staff that serve the members. So just as a reference point, I don't want to go too far into this, but there are different kinds of cooperatives. There's consumer cooperatives. You might have heard of REI, credit unions, housing cooperatives, I would say, are a form of consumer cooperatives. There's worker cooperatives that are businesses owned by their employees. There's actually another discussion going on right now at GBC on employee ownership. There are producer cooperatives, which are most commonly farms and agricultural producers, but they could also be artists or they could be manufacturers as well. There's land and real estate cooperatives that are typically real estate projects where a group of people hold real estate or land together. And there's a multi-stakeholder co-op that combines all of these things. But for our purposes, we're really focused on shared service cooperatives. So this is a business owned by multiple businesses that leverages shared supply chains, marketing, or other services, such as accounting, insurance, or potentially real estate, etc. There's a lot of different services to compete at scale. So some of those examples right now are True Value, Carpet One, and Opolis. We'll go into more case studies in just a second. Any questions about this definition before we jump into case studies? All right. So my first case study is Amicus Solar Co-op, and I've chosen businesses that are based in Colorado. So Amicus emerged from Namaste Solar, which is a solar installation company. They're a construction company, and they were basically facing down Solar City and some of these large solar producers that were able to install solar at much greater scale. And so what they decided was, hey, we're buying steel and we're buying these supplies from China. What if we all came together with other businesses that were small, just like ours? There's still about 100 employees, but that's considered small, for a construction company. And so they formed what is called Amicus Solar Cooperative in order to purchase things together. And on top of purchasing, besides like raw materials, they also collaborate in these things. They collaborate in safety policies, marketing, sales, installation operations, IT, benchmarking, raising capital, energy storage, risk management. So they basically come together as a group with 20 plus other small solar manufacturers or solar installers throughout the US. And they're like, how can we create a stronger purchasing platform? And so this is purchasing plus is what I would say. Similarly, nearly at the same time, they launched a second cooperative called Amicus O&M, which is operations and maintenance. And so here are all the different places where their members are. Essentially, they were like, what if we pooled our labor, and the people that were maintaining our solar grid in Colorado were hired by this cooperative, and we were able to share a labor pool that would service all of our small grids. And so this was another example of using the cooperative. So while this first one was more focused on shared purchasing of raw materials and operations, this is actually like the labor, the people that are hired. And so rather than every single business having to hire their own operations techs or their own maintenance techs, they're able to hire maintenance techs and operations techs together. And that reduced costs because it's reducing their HR function and their HR obligations, right, individually. Any questions so far about these two examples? Next up is Pixel Spoke. So Pixel Spoke is a worker-owned model. And so they've actually decided that all of their workers have the option to become members and to own part of the business. And so it was a traditional agency that became worker-owned. And so they are basically sharing the profits together of the business when it is profitable. This is another shared service cooperative called Opolis. It's based in Denver as well. And they've created what is called a professional employer organization. Essentially, if you are a freelancer or a gig worker, you can join this and run all of your invoices through Opolis. And so whenever your clients pay you, they pay Opolis, and Opolis is able to buy benefits for its members at a lower rate. And so if you were to go on the open market and look for health insurance, looking for, a retirement plan or different things, it would be more expensive than if you go through them. And they've created this PEO that allows independent workers to access benefits at a lower rate than they could in the open market. So this is an example of a shared service cooperative where all these small business owners, gig workers, are essentially collaborating at a deeper level. And they've used crypto too. So if you're interested in crypto, if that excites you, these are your people. Finally, I wanted to highlight the Civic Consulting Collaborative. And so this is a little bit like a worker-owned business, but instead of every single worker being a member and being a W-2 employee, they are all independent businesses and they have a shared cooperative in the middle of them. And so they're all facilitators, and they specialize in facilitators of public processes. So they typically work with public schools or governments or, quasi-governmental agencies. And their job is to facilitate these processes. So a lot of this co-op was actually hired for Denver's new mayor and rolling out the new process of, the different departments when Mike Johnson came into power. And so this is unique because instead of sharing labor or instead of sharing materials, this is a very low labor. This is a service-based industry, right? And so what they do is they've created a shared brand called Civic Consulting Collaborative that is able to elevate all of their profiles and make them have a bigger presence online than they could individually. So they each contribute a little bit of money. It's like, I think $300 a month or $300 a year to be a member of this cooperative. And they're able to leverage that money to get contracts. And when contracts flow through the cooperative, part of the contract stays with the cooperative. And then part of it goes to the independent contractor who takes it on. But the stuff that stays in the cooperative is able to be redistributed to the members. So a big key point here is that capital in a cooperative, if you elect to do subchapter T, which is a special kind of taxation, just like subchapter K is what typically used for LLCs. But if you elect to do subchapter T, it's pass through. And so cooperatives are very tax efficient in their ability to allocate resources because it's typically a pass through entity. And in this case, they've elected subchapter T, I believe, and they're able to win more contracts for their members, and they're also able to have a bigger marketing presence and to do business development through the cooperative. So if you're an individual member of this cooperative, you can still do your own business development. You're able to go after your own clients. Those are separate, but then you can have the cooperative as well for additional work. So as you're thinking about this, I just wanted to pause and maybe give us a second to reflect. What type of services would you ideally share? So this is a short survey. If you could have like one or two services that your business shared with others to reduce costs, to create greater efficiency, or to add value to all of your business, what would you share? So kind of think about pain points or other things that might be important to you. All right, so here's what people are starting to say. We have board training, we have bookkeeping, we have member education. What else? Love to hear from you.
I would say software costs, technology costs. Because there's often scale with software, right? The more users you have, the more you spread that cost out, and scale of efficiencies and all that.
Yeah, I'm working with a group of marketers, and it's like, if we could just get up to 100 people all buying Adobe together, it would save us money every month, And so thinking about those software costs definitely and scaling that. Is anyone else able to click? I'm seeing workforce development trainings. Oh, thank you. I'm seeing green revolving funds. Okay. If anyone wants to share more about that, I'm seeing residential contracting and then HOA-based businesses. So it sounds like this is more of like a real estate management, perhaps. So I definitely have heard of bookkeeping a lot from other businesses. And I think that's something that we all dream of a little bit, where like, hey, what if 5 people came to one bookkeeper? Would that make their life easier if they were able to do the same thing for 5 similar businesses? Or at the very least, could we get a discount referral fee for having so many people? The only thing I would add about health insurance, which I've heard again and again and again, is that it's a very tough nut to crack. And it's hard because there's just really complex laws governing how we get health insurance in this country. And so the PEO model is one way I've seen people get around it, but I think that it's very complex. In most cases, I've seen people offer dental and vision, but then they can't ever get to the big stuff, But yeah, I think these training things are really great for something that could be a shared service, right? If you're looking to create maybe a platform or some sort of educational resource that multiple groups will use, super valuable. So as we're thinking about cooperatives and we're thinking about what it takes to build them, I just want to clarify some key roles so that everyone has a sense of who does what, right? So typically we start and think about the steering committee. That's a group of people who commit to actively developing and launching a co-op. They often divide project tasks into smaller groups or committees. Not every steering committee has to become a member or a board member, but they often do, right? So these are people that care about the co-op coming into the world. What I have often heard whenever I tell people I'm starting a cooperative or I'm trying to recruit people is they're like, that sounds great. Let me know when it's done, which is a very human thing to say. And I think there's different ways of, speaking to that. If you're facing a lot of people, you're trying to organize a co-op and you're trying to get people excited to serve on the steering committee, there could be ways of speaking to that potential problem, but it's going to happen. People are going to tell you that. So the steering committee are people that are not those people. They're people who are ready to, usually on a regular basis, at least once a month is what we recommend. But ideally every other week, at least. So then there's also a co-op developer. This is one or more people who support the steering committee in developing the co-op through facilitation, project management, training, and other forms of support. So they're there, they've developed co-ops before, they're kind of there to guide and to help them understand their different steps and their different milestones and the different decision points that the steering committee has. So it's important, though, that the co-op developer is not on the steering committee, they are supporting. Finally, penultimately, there's the co-op members, a group of people the co-op is designed to serve. So the steering committee might actually be, not represent all the members. They might go out and recruit new people. They might listen to their peers and say, hey, here's what we're thinking. Here's a business idea. What are you thinking about this, right? To get feedback from potential members. Members receive financial rights and governance rights, and they are responsible for participating in the co-op and keeping it healthy. So this is for who the business is for. And finally, the board of directors is a smaller group of co-op members who are elected by the members and given additional governance rights and responsibilities. Usually not additional financial rights, but it could be up to you if you wanted to allocate a small stipend to serve on the board, if your business model allowed for that. Does that make sense about roles? Okay, so key steps in starting a shared service cooperative. So if you're looking to form this, I'm going to show a graphic later on, but this is more of a list. So I think it's really important to listen to peer businesses and identify shared needs to ultimately build a shared vision for your project. So you have to have a shared vision, shared sense of values of how you're going to start. This sounds kind of nonprofit-y. It might feel that way at first, but it's also really about just listening to each other. This can happen in one-on-ones. I recommend people take your friends out to coffee that are similar businesses to you. You could also do a listening session where you actually just bring people to a room. You could hold maybe a webinar or some sort of event where you're recruiting some people, have an open house. Leslie asks, is co-op similar to collective impact models of collaboration? Collective impact more nonprofit or government? Sorry if I missed that open. A cooperative is a business. So that's the only thing that's maybe different is that it's a business entity that is going to serve other businesses or individuals. It is a collective impact structure because it is democratically managed, but it is a business entity. There's one exception, I think, with housing, which housing could be a nonprofit because there's just different ways that affordable housing dollars have to flow. If you're receiving funds from the city or state, affordable housing funds, sometimes it's easier to be a 501c3. But generally, cooperatives are not 501c3s. You can be fiscally sponsored. So that's a thing that people always ask is can I get grant money? And it's yes, if you have a fiscal sponsor, you could receive 501c3 dollars. Okay, so once you have listened to the people around you, you would establish a steering committee who meets regularly and is committed to launching the co-op. Step 3 would be identifying the most effective levers between your business for cost savings or value creation. This is the time that you would really start to identify your target geography, your target business types or member types, and the services that you want to offer your members. So right now, I'm working with a group of childcare workers who all work from home, right? And they're in 3 different cities or 3 different regional areas. So we've grouped them together. And we've also asked them, okay, so ideally, if you could have anyone provide services to you, what services would you like to receive? And they've identified professional development is really important to them. Bookkeeping is really important to them. And so is some of the admin work. If you're caring for children all day for 8 or 9 hours, you don't necessarily want to apply for all these different federal funding dollars in your spare time. So a cooperative is going to be basically a shared service that allows them to save time on the admin side of their business. 4, develop your business model and complete a break-even analysis of how many members you will need to launch the co-op and how many you'll need to sustain the co-op. So this is important, just basic math to make sure that it's a go. You could complete a deeper feasibility study if you have the resources. Those can cost anywhere from, if you work with the SBDC, it could be a little less because they're great at offering lower cost resources, but it could be as much as $15,000 to do a feasibility study for a business. So we try to get people to start with something accessible, which is a break-even analysis. Let's just actually write down the basic math that we'll need, knowing your industry. Next up is developing a membership model that clearly explains what each member needs to give and get in order to participate in the co-op. So this is, essentially the economic participation section where we're thinking about the give and get. We're also thinking about the rights. We're thinking about how we want members to participate, how long. I've supported a cooperative in Aurora that is a shared service cooperative that is a commissary kitchen. And their goal is to provide immigrant entrepreneurs access to very low cost commissary for up to 3 years. And that is like a launching pad they want to give the members so they can save money in order to create their own brick and mortar or their own food truck. But it's not a forever cooperative. So you might have a cooperative, though, where you want your members to stay with you as long as possible. That's great, too. It's just different models. Decide how the cooperative will be managed and governed. So do you want a board? Do you want a manager? Are you going to hire staff? We spoke with a marketing cooperative, as I mentioned before, and one of the things they've been trying to identify is like, could we collectively hire someone to do some administrative functions for all of us? And so they might have a manager, but it would probably be part-time initially, just because it's not something that is fully built out. Number 7, build out your financial documents and business plan to identify the trajectory you want your co-op to take and what capital you will need to raise in order to launch. So this is a pretty critical step as well. Just developing your pro forma and starting to build out what it will look like, what your annual budget will look like, and then what it will look like year after year. Then once you have your business plan, we usually recommend you get your business plan. You have all the stuff that you know about your business first. Then you can hire a lawyer to help you complete your bylaws and membership agreement. So sometimes people want to hire a lawyer really early on because it's needed occasionally you need like a membership agreement, you need an operation, articles of organization to get your business, a bank account or to get registered with the IRS. But we generally encourage people to wait just a little bit to work with a lawyer. If you need to create a business entity that gets you started and then you can do a conversion later on, that might be fine. But we generally say have your business plan first before you go to a lawyer. Number 9, develop a brand and begin membership recruitment and capital raising. So you've ideally put in all the work, you've done your membership agreement, you have like a clear sense of how members are going to participate. So now it's just making it pretty and presentable and sharing it with the world and going out there. For most people, the initial source of capital for most shared service cooperatives will come from members, but it is possible that maybe your members collectively can bring in additional capital from outside sources. So maybe like their shared reputation, for instance, warrants an investment, or maybe one of your members has more capital than others, and so they're able to invest part of their resources into the business. That's totally possible. Another thing is totally possible in a cooperative structure, at least in Colorado. This is the one thing that is Colorado specific, is creating a limited cooperative association. And so this basically allows you to have members at the primary level. There's like a class of members that are your main members. And then there's a secondary class of members that are investor members. And that's very unique for Colorado. There are a few other states that have this structure where you can bring on investors, but those investors can be assigned unique rights and responsibilities. So that means that in a traditional Shark Tank scenario, if you're thinking about, somebody who's like, I want to invest in your business and I want 60%, right? They want to control something about your business. And what's unique about cooperatives is you can bring on investors that are they may be concessionary, but they're subsidiary. They're secondary to the primary members, and they may have lower governance rights and fewer decisions that they can actively make about the business than the primary members. So that's just one unique thing. And then finally, celebrate all your hard work with a lunch party. So if you want to see a graphic version of this, this is basically this. It's not always linear, right? So I think of it kind of like octopus soup. You're going to start with ideally your feasibility and business planning, establish some initial decision-making and governance with the group, with the steering committee, hone in on your membership model, create a financial model. You might set up some initial operations, the office, how you're going to communicate, develop your branding and marketing, and then raise capital. We do encourage people not to start with the conversation with raising capital because the biggest competitive advantage of cooperatives is the members themselves and is the people. And so if we were competing on the basis of capital, we would be creating a traditional firm, right? We would be going after venture capital and trying to build something that looks like things that venture capital likes. So we're not starting with capital from the outset, although we can't completely, we have to have capital in the mix, right? I just encourage people initially to think about how can you center your members as your competitive advantage from the beginning rather than center capital from the beginning. So, and then you have your co-op launch. We estimate in general for our process, this takes about 6 to 18 months, and it involves different deliverables and different steps. And it really depends on how frequently the group is willing to meet or put in outside work. So if you're meeting once a month, it's probably going to take longer. But again, we're building something that's long-term, that's infrastructure that your business will use. And so that's why it's a worthwhile investment, but it's also a long-term investment. And here's just if you love spreadsheets and you're into this, some people might really resonate with this. Here's some of the steps that I just mentioned, and then key deliverables that are typically involved in those steps. So you can get as detailed as you like. Okay, so that's sort of a basic overview of the case studies as well as steps that are involved in starting a shared service cooperative. I would love to hear from you all a little bit more about what you're thinking now and where you're at in the process of like evaluating, is this for me? Would I ever want this? So would love to hear from you, just if you have any questions or reflections at this point. Where do you see yourself in this process?
You know, Paul, I don't think I see ourselves in a co-op kind of situation, but it's always something to think about because it's so flexible, so versatile. It's is this, something that can be considered in the back of our mind, in the back of our strategy and business plan in the future kind of consideration. And so with that, I really do appreciate you outlining how the heck do you do this? So thank you.
Yeah. I will say, yeah, one of the coolest parts about cooperatives is they are very flexible. They're like a custom car. Like you can have whatever features you need for it to have, and you can calibrate how many rights or how many responsibilities you want to assign to each group. So I think it's definitely like a precision thing where you can be as precise as you want it to be, I guess. The other thing is the financial aspect of it. Like I mentioned before about subchapter T and taxation, generally, like I think people get confused about cooperatives being a nonprofit because ultimately the money that comes into the cooperative from the members is the members' money. And so if the co-op spends its money and it's under budget for the year, it will then return any gains, any profit that it's made that were from the members, it returns it back to the members as a dividend. And it does that in proportion to the amount of revenue that each member brought in. So if you had, 4 people in a cooperative and one of them was responsible for 50% of the co-op's revenue, they would be entitled to 50% of the dividends for the year. And so there's just like a neat proportionality that is very flexible and that encourages people to use the co-op, because the more they use it, the more they benefit from it. And that's why I think gets me excited. Yeah, Brenda?
Hi. I had a question. And I think that's cooperatives are a really great alternative to make lateral or neutralize some of the hierarchies in the way that we do business. Is there any top 1 or top 3 things that any organization should have before they become when should people what kind of ducks in a row should people have before they go into a co-op? Is it size? Is it money? Is it people, power? Because I imagine if your organization isn't profitable yet, those members have to loan the organization money maybe. So what are some considerations that we as small businesses we should have first before we go into this really great alternative of business model?
What is your business?
I'm an LLC.
Are you like a consulting business?
Yeah, we do consulting, training, and facilitating for white allies and white organizations.
Yeah. So I think the cooperative structures that we were talking about most here are called shared service cooperatives, which are your business partnering with other businesses to achieve some sort of shared efficiency. And so I think before you would take action, you would need to identify your biggest pain points and then listen to others about their biggest pain points and see if there's something that is shared, whether that's shared admin or shared purchasing or shared marketing. So for instance, one example I gave was a group of facilitators that are all independent contractors, and they created a shared brand that they do business development through. So that shared brand is like they have allocated resources to do marketing for them as a collective, which allows them to not have to market their individual services as much. They still can, but they have this other way of doing business development. So I think that was their shared, they were reflecting on their own industry and recognizing that as facilitators, as like solo practitioners, they weren't really going to be able to make a huge difference if they only approached it as an individual. And they did have like a social vision, right? And so they decided to start a cooperative for more of a shared impact view and also to create more power.